Good evening, everybody, and good Erev Shabbos. Thank you so much for joining me. This Shabbos, we are going to be completing Sefer Vayikra with the readings of Parshios Bahar and Bechukosai. And in Parshas Bahar and Bechukosai, to a certain extent, we discuss some of the aspects of Shemitah and Yovel. The Torah introduces concepts that we are familiar with. Actually, next year is the Shemitah year, in which an individual who is Zocha to live in the land of Israel has to honor and to respect the entire set of laws in which what a person may do or may not do with their land during the Shemitah year is very, very highly regulated. And essentially, a person has to take a big step back and demonstrate a tremendous amount of amunah in his recognition that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who truly controls and determines to what extent a person will be successful in their agricultural endeavors. And by really pulling back over the course of the Shemitah year, a person demonstrates their complete and total faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The implications of the Yovel year are in some respects even more dramatic and drastic. The Torah describes that which happens during the Shemitah year and the Yovel year. The Yovel year, in addition to the cancellation of debts, and in addition to the limitations of what a person can do on their land, there's a complete return of the ancestral properties to their original owners. The Torah says, "V'ha'aretz," the land, lo simacher litzmisus, that the land that a person had perhaps sold because he was in need of cash, and so therefore needed to liquidate some of his properties, they are to be returned to the original owners, because, as the Torah says, the land should not be sold litzmisus, which means like forever, in perpetuity. Now, that word litzmisus, as I'm sure you are thinking as we hear that word, that's a pretty unusual word. That's not a word that we really find all that often, which of course prompts some of the Mefarshim to understand and to try to identify what is the shorish of that word, what is the etymology of that word. So in the Sefer Haksava HaKabbalah, he says that the shorish of the word is of litzmisus is actually the word that we are familiar with, similar to the word simtsum, which means to limit something, to contract, to restrict. So, for example, he says, like the word som, which is a word that we use to describe a fast day, comes from that idea that a person restricts their eating on a fast day. And when something is restricted, when you hold back, so that's what we mean when we say that we are exercising tzimtzum, that we are minimizing, restricting, contracting what it is that we are doing. So when you think about it, that's a very strange word to use to describe that which the Torah is saying over here, and that is B'haaretz lo simacher litzmisus. It should not be sold forever, for eternity, perpetuity. That would seem to be the opposite of the word that we're saying, litzamtzem. So in other words, the word litzmisus is a very strange word. On the one hand, we're being told that it means forever, but yes, the shorish of the word, the origin of the word, means to restrict, to limit, really the opposite of whatever it would mean to say forever, always, for all of eternity. So Rabbi Yisrael Reisman offers a very, very interesting insight into understand this, and he introduces that by way of an interesting story that he shares that he once heard of the Chozeh Milublin, who had a Talmud who was very interested in setting up a schedule of learning for himself so that he would make sure to capitalize on all the time that he had, and he would be able to use his time not only in an efficient way, but in the most productive way. So he set up a daily schedule, and it was a very ambitious schedule. He basically said, in the morning, I'm going to learn, 10 prakim of Mishnayos, and in the afternoon, I'm going to do Daf Yomi, and I'm going to be Mavir Sedra at night. And he was able to identify throughout the course of every day exactly what he would be doing during every hour. And then he went and he showed it to his Rebbe, the Chozeh Milublin, and he wanted his haskama. He wanted to know, so what do you think? Do you think this is good? So the Rebbe looked it over, and he approved essentially of everything that this Talmud had suggested. But at the end of every line, right after the Talmud said that he was committing to do something, he wrote, Ulufamim lehefech, which means, and on occasion, just the opposite. Or maybe he wrote it in Yiddish, unamal fakert, There will be occasions where, instead of doing Mavir Sedra, I won't be Mavir Sedra. Instead of doing the Daf Yomi, I won't do the Daf. So the Talmud is very perplexed. What's going on over here? Why was the Rebbe saying that? So the Rebbe told him, listen, this is a great schedule. And in fact, you have some very, very ambitious goals. But there are times where things are going to come up, which are going to make it difficult, if not impossible, for you to actually achieve these goals. You would like very much to be able to each and every day devote yourself with the same amount of diligence and focus, and remain very, very steadfast and commitment in your objective to achieve these goals. But at the end of the day, very often life gets in the way. There are things that are going to happen. There are times that people are going to need your assistance. There may be a chesed opportunity that comes up. You'll be invited to a wedding, or perhaps you'll have to attend the levaya. There are going to be situations in which you are not going to be able to do this. And so therefore, instead of simply saying, this is what I am going to do at this time every single day, acknowledge from the outset rather, that there are going to be situations in which I am not going to be able to do this. So in other words, suggests Rabbi Reisman that litzmisus, which again means in this context forever and perpetuity, is a word which to a certain extent really limits us. Whenever we say that something is permanent, whenever we say that this is always the way I'm going to do it, or I am never going to do this, so to a certain extent, I really limit myself because I am speaking in such absolute terms. And the reality is that life simply doesn't work that way. Many things get in the way. There are complexities in life which make it difficult, if not impossible, for us to ever think about anything in the most absolute terms, that this is the way it always will be, or this is the way it always has to be. That we have to allow for a certain degree of flexibility. And if we cannot be flexible, if everything is always or never, so to a certain extent, what we are doing is we are being mitzamtzem ourselves. We are really limiting ourselves. I was wondered about what inspires or drives a person to get a tattoo. We know that the Torah prohibits one from getting a tattoo, so it's not really something that I've personally entertained in my life. But we know that there's a great market in the world for tattoos. It's a multi-billion-dollar market, and interestingly, over the course of the last 20 years, there has been an incredible demand for tattoos. I think that I've read statistics that since the year 2000, the revenue has surged many, many, many times in the tattoo industry. Now, what's really interesting is that over the past 20 years, there's been another similar trend, and that is the revenue not for getting a tattoo, but for removing a tattoo. However many people there are out there who get tattoos, there's a certain percentage of those people who decide at some point, whether it's a day later or a month later, or a year later, 10 years later, you know what? I'm going to remove that. Now, as we know, there are many different things that people could choose to brand on their bodies. They could be, certain sayings, certain picture that perhaps symbolizes something that's very important to them. Maybe the name of an individual that they love. There could be many, many things that people choose to put on their body in the form of a tattoo. Again, this is not intended as an endorsement for getting a tattoo, but just think about that. A tattoo is supposed to be permanent. A tattoo is a person's way of saying, this is something that I feel so strongly about. This is something that I am so certain about. This is something that I am so certain that I am willing to commit myself, that I'm going to put it on my arm or my leg or my cheek, wherever it is today. And I know that it is going to be here for the rest of my life. And not surprisingly, there is a growing number of people who say, you know what, I regret putting that on my body. Because in fact, that which I thought I was so certain about, I'm no longer so certain. Chazal tell us in the beginning of Pirkei Avos, in literally the first Mishnah, having Mesunim B'din, that when making important decisions in life, particularly we're talking over here about Dinei Torah, when the Dayanim are trying to adjudicate a certain matter that comes before them, or perhaps Balei Hora, who are in the process of making certain halachic decisions, have a Mesunim, they should be very, very slow to judgment, very, very careful not to rush to a conclusion. So the Torah Tamima wonders, how does that fit with that which Chazal tell us, the Gemara in Kiddushin tells us on the pasuk V'shinantam levanecha sheyehu divrei Torah mechudadim beficha, that we should be so familiar, we should be so fluent in Torah that if a person asks us a halacha, we should know immediately what the halacha is. If a person asks me, starts the Mishnah, let's say, I should be able to complete the sentence, and I shouldn't stop, and I shouldn't have to pause. Obviously, there are people with different abilities and intellectual capacities, but the goal should be that I should be so fluent in Torah study that it should be, again, v'shinantam shi'u divrei Torah mechudadim b'ficha. So the Torah Tamima wonders, so then why then the Chazal tell us have a misunim bedin? Why should we be slow to come to a decision? To the contrary, Chazal is saying, no, do it very, very quickly. So he says there's a difference between Torah knowledge. There's a difference between knowing the texts and knowing how to finish a pasuk and knowing where to find a Mishnah. In that respect, we should be very, very fluent. But there's a difference between that and coming to a conclusion in a particular area, which may be complex. When there's a situation that comes up that requires real thought and requires consideration about all the different parts and all the different pieces, and what in fact is appropriate in this situation, a person should not rush. A person should not say, oh, I know. I am certain that I know what is right in this case. Rather, a person should be humble and should recognize that no, in life, things are complex. And just because I may be familiar with a certain Mar Makam and I know where the source is, and I can tell you the conclusion of the Mishnah, that doesn't necessarily mean that I know with all certainty what should be in this particular case. And just going back again to the theory that we're working with, when a person thinks in such absolute terms, when a person thinks in terms of always and never, so really they are limiting themselves. They are limiting their own God-given capacity to really, really think things through clearly and to decide what is in fact appropriate in this situation. And maybe this is something that requires, as Chazal tell us, halana sadin. Maybe this is something I have to say, no, I have to think about this. Come back to me tomorrow. I can't go ahead and just give you an answer right now. And I'm reminded right now, Chazal tell us, it's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, that if a Sanhedrin, an entire court, is adjudicating a matter of dina nefashos, as a person, let's say, who was on trial for his life, he has committed some sort of, it's allegedly committed some sort of capital offense. If the entire Sanhedrin comes to the same conclusion and they want to convict him, so that's basis for an automatic acquittal. That sounds a little strange. If it's unanimous, so it should certainly lead to a conviction. But over here we're saying that if everybody comes to the conclusion that this person is guilty, so then he is automatically patur. Why should that be? Because we recognize that when dealing with such important matters in life, it cannot be so simple. It cannot be so open shut. There always has to be room for another way of looking at things. That life is way too complex for us to look at a matter of dina nefashos and say it's absolutely certainly going to be this way. And so therefore, I asked you in the title, the two words that a person should always remember never to say. Maybe we should think twice, and then again before ever saying the words always and never. Have you ever said, I'll never forgive him? Have you ever said, I never get any help? Have you ever looked at someone and said, you will never learn? I don't know. Maybe there's another way to say that. Maybe there's another way to think about it. I'll never forgive him. I never get any help. Is that true? You will never learn? Or how about you always put yourself before everyone else? Is that true? Whoever you may be talking to, does that person always put themselves before everyone else, or often, too often than you would like? I will always be appreciative of what you have done for me. We would like to always be appreciative. We would like to always have the same sense of gratitude and appreciation that we have right now. But perhaps that's a little presumptuous. Perhaps for me to say right now, I will always be appreciative of what you've done for me. Maybe let's take it one day at a time and not be the people who rush to say always and never. In life, there are few things, very, very, very few things that we can be absolutely certain about, that we can say with absolute conviction, always or never. In conclusion, I'll suggest perhaps one of the only things, and that is the Rambam in Hilchos Mezuzah teaches, Chayiv Adam Lizar b'Mezuzah, b'Pnei she'Chovas Hakol Tamid. Says the Rambam, a person should be very careful when it comes to the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Mezuzah, because after all, this is an obligation that applies at all times. I have a Mezuzah on my doorpost at all times. Says the Rambam, V'chol zman, and every time that a person enters and exits this doorway, Yivga b'yichud Hashem, a person encounters the concept of Yichud Hashem, Shmo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then says the Rambam V'yeda, she'in davar ha'omed la'olam u'liyomei olamim el yedias tzura olam. He says, the only thing that I can say for certain that is and always was and always will be is the knowledge in the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are certain truths in the world regarding which we can say always. We can say that with complete and total conviction. But most often in life, when we are encountering the challenges of life, when we are experiencing the day-to-day situations which can sometimes frustrate us and sometimes excite us, we should be humble and we should recognize that Gam ze yavor. If things are going really well, hold on, because sooner or later, you're going to come down to earth. And if things are really challenging and things are really, really bad, Gam ze yavor, this will also pass. This too shall pass. So, in conclusion, the two words that we should perhaps always remember never to say are always and never. Because when the Torah tells us, lo simachelitz misus, that the land should not be sold in forever, in perpetuity. So that word litzmisus again means so beautifully to constrict, to limit, because when we speak in such absolute terms, when we think in terms of always and forever, we in fact limit ourselves. Wishing each and every one of you a beautiful Shabbos, a Shabbos Chazak, a Shabbos in which we say, each and every one of us, in Shul, Chazak, Chazak V'nis Chazek, certainly a week in which we and all of Klal Yisrael need a lot of Chizuk, and may we be zocheh to have a comforting and enjoyable Shabbos as we head into the final week of Siras HaOmer, making our way closer to the day of Kabbalah Satorah. Thank you. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everybody.